Hi, my name is Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. For this episode, I'm asking the question, is myopia management worth it? And this is a question that keeps getting asked over and over and over again throughout the years, but the subtext keeps changing. The person who's asking it keeps changing. And for this episode, I've brought on none other than Paul Levine, Matthew Martin, and Dr. Cary Herzberg to help answer this question. And the reason why is because the four of us got together 5 years ago when this question, even though phrased the same, meant something completely different. There's a load of information for you in the regular version for our paid supporters who went to myopiamindset.com or went to our Substack. There's an extended version of this episode, even 30 more minutes of great discussion. You've got absolute titans of our industry on this episode with tons of inspiration, education, and motivation for you. So let's answer the question and get to the episode. All right, on this edition of the podcast, you are in for a treat because I have three absolute legends on the podcast with me for this episode. And I would go into each one of their CVs, but that would take up this entire episode. So let me just put it like this. I've got three master orthokeratologists and myopia management specialists on the podcast with me. Each one of them have done extensive amounts of speaking on a variety of topics related to ortho-K and myopia management. Patients come from great distances just to see them for their ortho-K and myopia management treatment, and they have all given an obscene amount of their free time to be ambassadors for our industry. All three of them are past board members, fellows of the AAOMC as well. Cary and Paul are past presidents of the AAOMC. It is my pleasure to welcome Cary Herzberg, Matthew Martin, and Paul Levine to the program. Guys, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah. Wow. It's been 5 years, guys, since we gathered together last.
It's wild. I am honored to be in such august company.
I can't believe it's been 5 years since we did this last.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why I assembled this. When I considered doing a new podcast, the one episode that kept coming up for me is a revisit to this topic. So just to give you an idea, 5 years ago, the four of us recorded an episode, Is Myopia Control Worth It? I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. And just for a frame of reference, it's one of the highest viewed, most listened to episodes out of that set. It's been one of the most talked about episodes that people have come up to me and personally referenced. I heard this episode of the podcast. This is what I think about it. And it fed that 2019 Vision by Design, which was the AAOMC's best meeting in San Antonio. Like it was epic. But, so much has changed in the last 5 years when it comes to ortho-K and myopia management. And so I wanted to revisit this topic. Is myopia management still worth it? And to kind of paint a picture, and then I'm going to throw it over to Paul first. I feel like one of our biggest obstacles back then was the fact that myopia management was this controversial topic. Should ODs be doing it? Do we have enough studies out? Can you prove to me that this is effective? Why is this worth my time? I feel like that's the fight back then. Are we still fighting that similar battle, or have things changed? Paul, what do you think?
Well, things have definitely changed, but we're still fighting that battle. We're fighting it with not just, outside of optometry, but inside optometry. There's still plenty of people out there saying, what's so terrible about being myopic? Why do we need to do this? And is it really something that I should, migrate my practice toward? But I'm definitely hearing that less. And I'm certainly hearing more and more people saying, I think I want to get into this myopia management thing. And to be honest with you, the biggest change that I've seen is in the actual patients, because they're now coming in and demanding these types of services. They're not. Sure, I still have plenty of patients that I have to describe it to and explain to them that we can do things a little bit differently now than we had in the past. But I have more and more people calling up and asking for the service. And so if you're not providing it, then, I mean, there's just a gigantic population of people that you're missing out on that that worship the things that you do and find it very important. And and it's really does feel like it's becoming standard of care.
Do you agree with that, Matthew Martin? You're a regular mainstay at Vision by Design, especially in boot camp. So many people have learned from all three of you, but lately you are the guy at boot camp. So many lectures at last Vision by Design. I was super impressed. Does that line up with your evaluation?
I think it's an interesting conversation because back in the day when we were the rebels, right? When Cary first approached me and when Paul and everybody, we were like the outsiders. And there's a part of me that really liked that. What I run into now is I run into a lot of people who say they're doing myopia management who aren't really doing myopia management, or everyone claims that that's doing something they're doing, but they're not actually doing it to the degree it needs to be done. They're not taking into consideration axial length. They're not taking into consideration a lot of things that I think need to be addressed. I love the fact that people have come into my office now and they're like, I want myopia management for my kid. I love that. Just this evening, or just this morning, I had a one-day ortho-K patient. This afternoon, I started a -7.5 patient in peripheral defocus contact lenses and low-dose atropine combination thing. We're running, myopia master, and we're running axial length measurements. I love that part of it. I think it's miraculous how far it's come, but I think it's also in some ways not as good as it once was. And I don't want to use the term good because it's probably not an appropriate term, because I think there's a lot of dilution of what myopia management truly is, on the level that Cary Herzberg and Paul Levine and I and so many of our colleagues are actually involved with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that lines up with what I've seen over the last couple of years. I had a great education over the last couple of years, I was constantly in practices of people, ODs who are brand new to myopia management. I'm used to working with Cary Herzberg, Matthew Martin, Paul Levine, this elite tier of myopia management orthokeratologist specialists. So to see brand new docs struggle with their myopia management journey, what I noticed is that it was almost like ODs had become more reactive instead of proactive. In our episode from 5 years ago, we said, if you want to do myopia management, you got to be proactive. And I saw ODs becoming even more reactive. Like I was a clinical sales consultant with Johnson & Johnson selling the Ability lens I would install in practices. And I went all the way to Colorado and installed in a practice and then said, we were talking about what they wanted to do with myopia management. And the doctor, after I was done installing it, said, we don't really have many plans for doing it. We just want to be ready in case somebody comes in. And I was like, I came all the way here from Chicago. What are you talking about? Like, I didn't say that out loud, but that's what I was thinking. Cary is one of the pioneers of our industry. What do you think about that? Have we gotten more reactive? Like, what is your perspective?
Well, you're talking to three people here who are immersed in it, and there's a big difference. You got to take this thing seriously, and very few people do. I think if you did take it seriously, you'd be doing that. Wouldn't be happening in the Colorado experience. I think you'd be actively looking for ways to apply this and finding patients that you could talk to. I mean, we learn a new procedure. We're doing something unique, new equipment, whatever comes in. We want to use that equipment. I mean, right. We want to make it work. We want to see how cool it is. Myopia is like that, but it's not. It's not user friendly. It's just. At this point, it's a secondary in college in our education because the optometry schools don't offer it. It's just like a couple of weeks maybe. So I mean, until something changes where you actually see the schools of optometry actually teach this stuff like we think it ought to be taught, then you're going to have this thing where you have three guys here who are totally advocates, and then you have the rest of us, the rest of our colleagues who are, most of them aren't. So
yeah. Matthew Martin, is that going to keep Ortho-K in that caliber that you had described earlier, like, I learned from Cary Herzberg the term like 80% of the cases will be done by 20% of the practitioners out there. Is that our future? Like, I don't want to be negative about it. I want ortho-K and myopia management to blow up. I want every OD who's interested in it to succeed in it. But is that the reality of the situation? Is it going to be the 80-20?
I think that's an interesting conversational point, and I do think that currently it is that way. But keep in mind that it was 95%, 5%. So I mean, we've increased the amount of people who are involved in myopia management. We've increased by the amount of people who are aware of it. But like I have a doctor. She was referred to me by another doctor. She's driving 3 hours away to come down here so I can fit her child in ortho-K retainers and teach her how to do ortho-K, because she lives three hours away, and we're going to get her set up and get her excited and get her stoked about ortho-K and about myopia management. She wants to be involved, but there's nobody in her area that takes it seriously. Maybe they dabble, or maybe they're not serious about it, or maybe they're not involved. I think it's a matter of, and I'm preaching to the choir here. I think it's a matter of the doctors who are in it to win it, to try to encourage other people to do it, right? So I am here in the position I am in a fantastic practice I could afford to build in sometimes difficult economic times, because of Cary Herzberg, and because of Paul Levine, and because of the people that pulled me aside in an elevator in Ontario and said, buy some fit sets and start fitting people. And I've talked about this before, and it's so true. We need to be sharing that excitement, that passion with others, so that we can get other people involved. But the doctors have to be receptive to that, right? Like, they have to be receptive to wanting to learn. And one of my lectures I give it whenever I do myopia management stuff, is I talk about the fact that some of our colleagues just don't want to do it. So I had some colleagues I reached out to. I'm like, I'd love to educate you. I'd love to help you to do this. I'm willing to come and lecture to your staff. You don't even have to refer patients. You can see them yourself. And these doctors were like, nah, I just don't want to do it. It's too much work.
Right.
So I think the 80-20 thing is way better than the 95-5 thing that was happening before, but it's definitely not as far along as it needs to be. And stop me if I'm wrong, Cary and Paul, but do you feel that way as well?
I think we're looking at I think we're looking at a situation where it's hard to do myopia. It really is and you're in a system where with the vision care plans that doesn't allow it to happen, really, because you don't get paid to spend the time. It's really preventive care. I mean, when it boils down to it, we're practicing preventive care, and that takes time. That takes education, and most doctors aren't willing to put it in for different reasons. But so I don't. I see Justin Kwan going around, other great doctors going around talking about, wouldn't it be great, to see this kind of like total immersion into myopia that we want, but it doesn't happen by accident. You got to go in there and be intentional, and we've got to spread the advocacy that we have within the academy, that small ball of energy that you're speaking about. We have to spread that to the rest of optometry, and that starts in the school system. You got to get the students involved in that. Secondary education is fine, but you got to, they need to come out of school knowing how difficult and how hard myopia is to deal with, and what they need to do to address that. So,
Paul, does that line up with your line of thinking as well?
It does. I do have I have the luxury of having fourth-year students that rotate through my office, and the bad news is they come in with very little to no experience in managing myopia the way that we talk about managing myopia. And they have even less experience in orthokeratology and how to use that type of modality. But the good news is they're really excited about it, and they come in and they wished that they had gotten more of it in school, and they really think that it is something worth learning and perfecting. So I do think that we've got a bunch of young docs that are excited about it. Now, whether they have the motivation or the gumption to actually become expert in it only time will tell. But I can just tell you that there is a level of excitement there. And every time they see the success cases, you know, it kind of blows them away. And I'll be honest with you, and I'll throw this back to Cary and Matthew. I mean, between the three of us, we've got how many thousands and thousands of fits have been done. And aren't you just kind of still blown away every time?
Absolutely.
Like how,
Yeah.
like it is truly like magic when you can apply. The thing I love the most about Ortho-K of all the myopia management strategies is that there's such a secondary benefit to be able to see clearly without the dependence on an appliance. And I mean, yes, you're dependent on wearing this thing when you're asleep, but you know what I'm saying. And it's just the Ortho-K treatment is 24/7, 365, because whether the lens is on or the lens is off, the therapy is being delivered to that visual system, you know, and we have other options, and those other options are terrific, but they still don't give the level of full-timeness that I think you get with orthokeratology. And the students that roll through my office kind of really do appreciate that excitement and that passion that I still bring to every single case that I manage.
Yeah. Yeah. Matthew, you had your hand up.
You're killing me. You're
it.
killing me. So I talk about this all the time whenever I have the chance to lecture out. And that is that 22 years of doing this, 22 years, thank you to Cary Herzberg for that. 22 years of it, I am still stoked 2 or 3 mornings a week when I get a patient in who's on a first morning Ortho-K follow-up and they're 20/20, they're -3 and they're 20/20. And I'm like, who's the man? I'm the man. And they love me and I love it. And everyone is stoked about it. And it's ridiculous. There's nothing in eye care. There's nothing in the entirety of eye care that compares. I took a 2-day course on dry eye, and I went through this whole process. It was like $2,000 to take this course as a whole thing. I got about 3/4 of the way into it, and I reached out to the woman who was running it, and I said, "Are these dry eye patients always this sour and crabby?" And she's like, "That's the nature of dry eye patients." And I'm like, she's like, "Think of how much good you can do them." And I'm like, I'm just not ever going to do dry eye, because if I can do Ortho-K and the kids come in and they love me and the parents love me and they walk out thinking I'm like the best dude ever and I feel good, like I cannot conceive of why every doctor on the planet doesn't want to do this. This is the coolest thing there is.
Yeah, we want to win at this, and who wants to, I mean, I love geriatric patients to death, but they never change. Sure. You're in a sinking ship there, and you're trying to prop something up, and they don't even listen. It's like you're expending your breath for nothing. And here we have these kids that come into our office all the time, right? And that you change their lives. You can meaningfully make a difference in a young person's life, and you can't do that anywhere else. I mean, I chose a long time ago to, this path for many reasons like that.
And Paul, don't you agree? Like, are you still stoked every first morning?
Every time. I mean, I had one last week that was, a -4 or -5. I can't remember exact, but I told them, I expect you to be about 50 to 60% better, when I see you tomorrow morning. And the kid was 20/20 in both eyes. Like, and it's just like, this is the greatest thing of all time. This is the most fun that I have being an eye doctor.
It is the bee's knees.
Yeah. Hey guys, I just got back from India. Okay, I was in India, and we had a conference there, an optometry conference. I had doctors coming to me by the droves that I talked in 2018 in Mumbai, and they came back to tell me what a difference that made in their lives. So it isn't just impacting our patients. I don't mean the word just, but it's impacting this entire industry, as you're explaining, Paul, with those young doctors that come in, and look at your practice and what you're doing. You're changing lives with the doctors themselves. Their path is different, right? What else? What better way than this? I mean, yeah, we don't have that many of us around, but I mean, what we do impact is huge.
Right. And Cary, you spoke about this 5 years ago on the podcast we did together about the immediacy in other parts of the world because of their populations, ethnicity, all these other
ground
factors.
Zero, guys, ground zero, India.
Yeah. Why don't we have the immediacy yet in Ortho-K in the United States? Like,
it's,
Why? Where is that? Like, why hasn't it shown up in the last 5 years?
We talk about the incidence, and of course, in the Asia, it's approaching some countries. South Korea is 98% incidence of myopia. We don't have it there at this point in the U.S., but it's growing so dramatically. The immediacy, you're exactly right, Matt. The immediacy is not there. It just isn't caught, on. To where it needs to be. And, that's where, how do you do that? Again, I think it starts with, you've got to educate these doctors coming out of school. They've got to have a thorough background of this stuff. This is probably one of the most important things we can talk about with our students, of optometry.
Yeah. And I hate to be the bearer of more bad news. I hope that's not my role on this podcast moving forward. But, in my time in industry, like I was at a doctor's practice where, man, he was lucky if he had 15 minutes with a patient. Like he was scared. He looked like if somebody could jump around the corner and throw a patient at him. They had his schedule stacked, and I couldn't believe he was trying to attempt to do Ortho K. And that's one of my biggest fears, as we see private equity move into this space. I mean, I know it's not like, maybe it's not fair to generalize in that case, but like, are we seeing more restriction? And because I grew up with Ortho K and myopia management being the domain of the private practice, but with students, we talk about students learning this in school, but why, like, if they do or do not learn it, what does it matter if they come out of school with so much debt that they can't invest in their own future and then buy a private, go into private practice? Cary, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, we put ourselves in this position, and you can see this coming for many, many years, where these young people, they're not getting reimbursed for their skills, and they have huge debt issues coming out of school, so that they are forced into the system, and it actually will affect long range optometry and its future growth, because you won't have the bright young minds going into this field because they can't see it. So that it's a threat. It's a threat to all of what we cherish as optometrists. On the other side of the coin, however, and the myopia thing, this specialty of myopia care, which I think is going to still be specialty care for us, is a promise that they can actually fulfill, because it really separates them. It gives them freedom from these vision care plans, because it's private care patients. It's the concierge care, basically. These patients are paying out of pocket. They're actually paying to be in the office to see the doctor, instead of the reverse, which happens, which is basically they go to the doctor because they take their insurance, right? Mm-hmm. So they're actually going there, like the old days, like my dad used to practice. They came to see him. So it does offer some hope for the future, despite all these gloom and doom, with the way things have been running with our profession. We really haven't handled this thing well as a profession. We've not, we've allowed ourselves to be manipulated. We've given away our services. We allow these vision care plans to live in our office rent free. What better way to, that's a great deal, Yeah. And our staff works for them too. So we're it's crazy.
Paul, what is your experience in that space, like at this stage in your career, if you don't mind sharing with us?
Well, in my office, I mean, I still take, most of the larger vision plans. Mm-hmm. And I do spend a lot of my day, seeing primary care patients, for the pittance that we get as a, remuneration for our time and effort. And the other thing that we've definitely seen is that we might be getting compensated for our labor, but we've lost parts. So the parts are being purchased outside of the practice big time. When I'm talking about traditional contact lenses, I'm talking about, spectacle sales. I mean, you can see across the board that those numbers are down inside the practices. But the myopia patients come in and they happily pay to be there. They understand that this is something outside of what is given to them. The biggest problem I have with vision plans is that it's created this culture of I can't. Mm-hmm. So, you're going to get new glasses this year? No, I can't, because I'm not eligible until next year. You want to come in for an appointment because you're having a problem? No, I can't, because it's not covered. You just have to pay. Well, you don't have to have that conversation with people that come in for for specialty care. And even though I do accept vision plans, there's not a day that goes by that I don't have private pay patients come in, because just like Cary said, they're coming to see me. They're not going to where they have to go. So this have to and can't, these are words that need to somehow become eliminated. And I think one of the ways to do that is to differentiate yourself. And my partner, John Abundanza, who some of you on the call will know of his name, he's a behavioral optometrist, vision therapy guru. And his line, which I love, is, do you know how many eye doctor practices that patient drove by to come see you?
Right.
And so, that's how I think there's a way to navigate taking plans and still succeeding and practicing the way you want to practice.
Right. Matthew, you just expanded into a new space. How did you do what Paul is describing? Like, how did you differentiate yourself, and how did you define your practice?
Yeah, so I think this is really an interesting conversational point, because so let's talk about economic downturns. Let's talk about insurance. Let's talk about, the market, if you will. So we moved from our 1,200 square feet to a 4,800 square foot facility. I bought an 8,000 square foot building. I mean, we're kind of all in on it here at the office. We take insurance as well. I do all of the comprehensive normal stuff: glasses, contact lenses, multifocals, multifocal contacts, all that jazz. The key for me is this. I just met one of my colleagues at a little education talking about Zydemvi, which is a Demodex drug that's out. But afterwards, when we were walking out, I stopped and I talked to him a little bit about business, because he's maybe 8 miles away from me, and we're in a fairly rural setting. And I said, how is business? The last 3 weeks have been kind of rough for us. And he said, interestingly enough, since July, it's been really rough for his associate. His associate just does bread and butter care: glasses, contact lenses, so forth and so on. He said the last 3 weeks, meaning that about 2 weeks before the election and this week after the election, had been very difficult in his office. But previous to that, he's been rocking, because he does specialty care, dry eye. He dabbles a little bit in ortho-K, but mainly his focus is dry eye. For us, we haven't had any problems until just recently with the election stress, right? And it's because we do myopia management. So the whole point of this podcast is it worth it? And the answer is yes. Everybody else has been suffering since July. But I only now was like, things are a little bit slow, because we've had the specialty care. People have been coming in. They do ortho-K, they do peripheral defocus contact lenses, they do atropine, we do scleral lenses. Because that specialty care isn't completely isolated from the economic situation, but it is certainly buffered compared to just bread and butter optometry. And I think that's a big take-home message for someone who's out there who is flirting with myopia management. For goodness sakes, is it worth it? Yes, it's worth it, because it insulates you from a lot of the terrible stuff that's going on in eye care as a whole. And definitely. I think Paul's 100% right, and Cary's 100% right. It's really about, can you do something that's special, that people are excited about? And I've talked about this in lectures on stage. I've talked about it on management stuff I've done with online webinars. I was in India with Cary in 2018, lest you should forget. I have people that drive 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to come to our office. If you drive 4 hours, you've driven by 100 optometrists by the time you arrive to my office. And I know Paul has the same thing. I know Cary's had the same thing.
Yeah. In the practices I've been in over the last couple of years, it's like I've tried to bring the messaging and the attitude of all in from that I learned at the AAOMC, and I tried to bring that to every practice. I grew up in Cary's practice. I got to see firsthand how this works. I know what works. And yet I still had a huge challenge trying to teach these ODs, like, here, look, I know this works. I've seen it work. Here's what you do. And it's like, they wouldn't bring it up. They wouldn't even talk about it, right? They, wouldn't position themselves to have enough time to serve a myopia management practice. They weren't their staff was not on board of it. I don't even know if they even talked to their staff about it. It was like all these things that just hadn't been done. Cary, as one of the pioneers, what did you do to make your practice special? I grew up in it. What did you do? How did you cross that hump? Go from just being, like we dropped insurance. I remember when we first implemented Ortho-K. So what did you do back then?
It was recruited patients. Basically, it was just told the story of why they, the compelling story about Ortho-K and myopia management. And the cool stuff about back then was the fact that, I mean, it wasn't cool, but it was the fact that you think that there's few people doing it now. Well, back in the day, in the 1990s, there were even less. So when you had that message for patients, and a lot of them were Chinese and Indian, they really gravitated to us because we offered them some hope for, no parent wants to see their child's eyes getting worse. I mean, if you just have to tell the story properly. I think the guys will agree with this. And so if you phrase it and put it properly, they're going to be all on board. I mean, this thing, it isn't the kind of hard thing that people make it out to be, but you got to tell the story. And that takes time. And the patient has to get to know you and other things. So it takes an effort to educate. But once that story's told, it's very, they come in droves, actually, to see you.
Yeah, for sure. And Paul, surely you must have just instantly been killing it in Ortho-K, right? Your first time out?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Nothing bad ever happened or went wrong or was frustrating. Like, what was it like for you?
I mean, it's like Nike, right? Just do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you once you make the decision to go, you gotta go. And don't be afraid, and know that you, as a trained optometrist, are uniquely qualified to provide these services. And the only thing that's holding you back is your confidence to do it. And once you kind of make that decision, like, I'm just going to do this, you go, and guess what? Your first patient does not need to know that they're your first patient. They just don't. And it took me a while, I dabbled. I did. Mm-hmm. I was a dabbler until I actually saw Nick Despotidis give a presentation at the GSLS. And this was many, many, many years ago. And he basically waved his finger at the audience and he said, "Don't dabble." And I took that to heart. I went back to my office the next week and I was like, all right, I'm in it to win it. And yeah, sure, it's hard. And guess what? It's challenging in the beginning because you really don't know what you're doing, except that you do, you just don't realize it. And every experience is a learning experience. And, but again, at the end of the day, you can do this. You have the skills, buy the equipment, have the lenses in your practice that you want to try to fit, and just go for it.
Yeah,
good things will happen.
You had said, you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but you do. Like I've talked to docs and said, you have to position yourself as the expert. And they're like, but I'm not an expert. I'm just figuring this out as I go. So how expand on that real quick? Like how is it that they know, even though they think they don't know?
Because we know anatomy, we know physiology, we know how the eyeball works. We have to learn how, if we're talking about Ortho-K, we have to learn how reverse geometry lenses work. And once you get that, grasp that, understanding of how to manipulate those lenses, then it falls into place. And like I said, every single time you do a fit and every single time you have success, you learn from it. Every single time you have a failure, you better learn from it. And my favorite thing to say is, the smart person learns from their mistakes, but the really smart person learns from other people's mistakes. And so that's why when you surround yourself with other professionals that are good at this, guess what? It's gonna increase the rate with which you are proficient by hanging out with colleagues that know what the heck they're doing. Because one thing about people that do myopia management is that we love to share. And I think that's what Matthew was saying before, when he kind of liked being the 5%. He liked being that small little segment of expert. I think that number is growing, but we're still a small percent. And so when you surround yourself with these experts, that's how things really change. And that's where something like Vision by Design and the AAOMC is just so vital for anybody that even has a remote interest in incorporating this into their practice, because we just love to share. Maybe we love to gloat. I don't know. Maybe. Let me show you this case I did. Oh, check this out. You won't believe this. But at the end of the day, it's just, that camaraderie, I just think is so important. And every case, every fit that you do it's good for the patient, it's good for you, and it's good for the profession of optometry. Right. Every single one.
Matthew, I know that you learned by surrounding yourself with the kind of people that Paul is talking about. It started in an elevator. Like how like, talk about your experience. Like, how did that get you in the right frame of mind?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to think about here. The first thing I want to do is take a second. I'm going to grab my camera. I'm going to show Cary Herzberg the top of the little bar that my staff bought me. This is actually a bar in my office. Cary, do you see what's sitting there?
Yeah.
That's like 14 different fit sets.
Yeah.
Because Cary Herzberg said to me in an elevator one time, buy yourself a fit set and start fitting patients. Just get a fit set and go. And I was like, okay, so I did it. Now, do I do wave? Do I design my own lenses? Yes, I do. Do I order from places? Yes, I do. But I still have fit sets sitting there because it reminds me that every patient is a candidate. And it reminds me that sometimes a person's a -150, 43.5 diopter spherical patient who I can fit out of my fit set for next to nothing, and they're going to be ridiculously happy. I'm going to have a great profit margin, and everyone is where they need to be. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that's absolutely hilarious. You talk about learning your lesson. 22 years ago, I learned my lesson. Cary's like, oh God, how many times are going to hear this? But it's true. It's so ridiculously true. To this day, I get lenses out of that fit set and I put them on people and I'm like, close your eyes for 20 minutes. I take them off and the patient sees well and everybody's happy. And so part of your question is, learning from people. And I think Paul really stated this. I can't emphasize vision by design. I emphasize it so much. Every lecture I give, whether it's GSLS, whether it's vision by design, whether it's webinars, because I've been fortunate enough to be asked to do a fair amount of webinars, I always talk about vision by design. And I sound like I'm advertising it, but there's just no better meeting. You go to Vision by Design, and you come out of a lecture and you run into somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, let me tell you what I just started doing. This super thing is cool. I'm now doing translimbal, hyperopic, presbyopic, ortho K. Like 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's ridiculous. And now I'm like, yeah, I could do that. Because why? Because someone told me I could. Because one of my colleagues spent an hour and a half after hours with me. I have notes, by the way, like 4 pages of notes, right? This is Anith, and Anith spent 2.5 hours with me after work designing translimbal ortho K lenses for a patient because he was stoked about the fact that I might start doing it. Like, what other specialty in eye care, or really, what other specialty in any of healthcare, do you run across people who are like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm so excited. We're going to do this. And I want you to be successful. And I want you to make money. And I want to share my secrets.
Right.
Nobody else does that. Nobody in healthcare does that. Nobody in eye care does that, except for the myopia management people, because we are stoked about what we do. Cary, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. It's just absolutely, Matt. You're right on. It's another thing is that, when you do these kinds of things, I mean, you think about, we asked that this has been 5 years since we got together last to talk about this. And you think about what's happened in the last 5 years, right, with COVID, which has been a disaster. And unfortunately, in many practices, with COVID, the bad habits that kids have and the lost years that they have, without myopia management, my God, prescriptions rose dramatically higher because they were spending so much time on computer screens and doing all the wrong things. So our patient base, you guys can chime in on this thing, was very stable. Actually, we didn't lose that much ground because we saw, we kept up with it, and the patients were doing the retainers and the myopia management procedures. So it's those, you get verification all the time in life about different things that you're doing, whether it's your colleagues that you're doing it with, or the patients that you see every day, or the people you happen to meet along the way on the road of life here. But it always comes down to the fact is that, I'm proud of what I do. I love what I do. You talk about burnout. I mean, I talk to doctors half my age, and they're burned out because they're on a vision care plan program and they're seeing patients every 10 minutes, and they're and here I am in my late 70s now, still traveling around the world, still talking with you guys, still seeing patients in a practice I'm with now. And what do I get with these patients? I get hugs all the time. I get to hug the parents now because I'm with my other associate doctors that they go work on the patients, work them up, and I'm giving the parents hugs. We talk about, and the one thing we talk about that we always testify to is axial length. This is a population that has high incidence of it's Chinese and it's Asian and it's Indian.
All right, that's it for this regular version of this episode of the Myopia Mindset. The discussion actually does go on for another 30 minutes with Paul Levine, Matthew Martin, and Cary Herzberg. That's on the extended version of the episode. You can find a link to that in the description below, and that'll take you to our Substack. You can also go to our website at myopiamindset.com and click on the subscriber button. That'll give you the opportunity to become a paid supporter, and if you would support the Myopia Mindset, you get access to the extended version of every episode. In addition, you also get an exclusive bonus episode of the podcast. And the bonus episode for this month will be an episode that's called Risking It All for Myopia Management. And because I grew up in Cary's practice, I was there through a lot of the difficult moments that we endured on our way to success with myopia management. And one of those things was dropping insurance. And Cary has a lot of detail to go into about what that was like and how that affected the practice and what that means for modern optometry at large. So if you would, support the podcast, $12 a month, which basically comes out to the price of a cup of coffee each and every week. So if you would buy me a cup of coffee to have on amazing guests and nerd out about myopia management, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the podcast. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next one.